First time I saw Michael Fink speak in front of a room full of financial planners, his topic was kind of surprising to me. Michael has his PhD in finance and is a professor of wealth management, but his talk was about what makes people happy in retirement. He wanted to share data about what activities and habits contribute to in-retirement satisfaction and joy. And he brought his talk to life with colorful examples of how his own family members had pursued different paths during their later years with varying degrees of success. I witnessed that day, and I've witnessed on many occasions since, Michael's genuine interest in the human aspect of retirement planning. Of course, he recognizes that financial matters are important. It's difficult to be happy or even content if you're worrying about money. But at the end of the day, everything he does is in consideration of real human beings, their relationships, their goals, their failings, and what they want out of their lives. Retirement planning is not an academic exercise for him. That is a passage from the book that I'm going to talk to you guys about on this episode of the book club, as well as perhaps several future episodes. This is a book called How to Retire, on the nose, and this is by Christine Benz. And Christine has worked as a writer, I believe, at Morningstar for many years. And the subtitle of the book is 20 Lessons for a Happy, Successful, and Wealthy Retirement. So how Christine has structured this book, which is something that I really love, is basically in 20 different lessons where she brought together 20 different authors, thinkers, speakers, writers, finance people, kind of life coach type people to give their opinion on what will make for a successful retirement. Now, not all of these individuals are retirement focused per se, but they all have some insights on what makes for a fulfilling life. And I think that really what we're trying to explore, not only just in the book club episodes of this podcast, but on our episodes generally, is how we use our expertise. And on this podcast, it's financial planning topics with a specialization, I would say, but not to the exclusion of other topics in retirement planning. We're really just using this as an avenue to discover how it is that we're going to live very successful lives. So I don't want this to be a more blinkered approach to, oh, you just come to this podcast to hear about money. It's like, well, we're going to talk about money, but we're also going to talk about money and how we can use it in order to create the life that we actually want to live. How when we get to the end of our days, we're going to be able to look back and feel as though we were successful. So let's jump in. This first lesson, again, the author of this first chapter, or the person she interviewed for this first chapter, is a man by the name of Michael Fink. He has his PhD in finance, and he's a professor of wealth management. But a lot of the research that he does, and the title of the chapter is going to give that away, is centered on visualizing your in-retirement lifestyle. And for listeners of the podcast who listened to the episode we did on the book by Michael Norton and Elizabeth Dunn, called Happy Money, there's going to be a lot of overlap here. And I think that that's a nice little tie back. So went through that opening, and we're going to get into a little bit more of Michael Fink's philosophy when it comes to planning out his retirement, or your retirement and his retirement. So Christine goes on to say, when I asked Mike what lesson he'd like to discuss for this book, I wasn't surprised that he didn't choose a nitty-gritty financial topic like lifetime income streams or safe withdrawal rates, or even though he's contributed some important research in those areas. Instead, he said he wanted to discuss how people can visualize their in-retirement lifestyle and then put in place, and this is going to be crucial, habits to make it happen. Okay? So Fink goes on to answer a question. He says, our traditional view of retirement is that it is something to look forward to, something that we will toil and accumulate for so that we can finally enjoy ourselves. It is sort of a myth that we've built up in our heads about what retirement is. It's freedom, it's autonomy, it's the ability to do whatever it is that we want to do. And so we focus a lot on the financial aspects because that's going to support our ability to have that autonomy. For some people, and especially people who are likely to read this book or who are likely to listen to this podcast, it is more of a math problem. And they feel they've succeeded they feel like they've succeeded if they have saved enough, if they're financially comfortable, if they don't have to worry about money. Of course, it's a very important part of living well in retirement, not feeling like money is a barrier to doing the kind of things that actually matter. But you also have to develop the skills to figure out how to be happy in a time of leisure, if that's what you're doing. And that's a big question. Is this just a long weekend? Is this just a big vacation? And are you set up to be able to live? So that really is going to center on where that discussion between he and Christine is going to go. And I don't want to make light of the fact that in order to have a successful retirement, in order to feel content in retirement, you do have to solve the kind of math problem that they've alluded to here. You do need to work, at least in my view, with a professional to decide, okay, have we structured our assets in a way that is going to safely, reliably, consistently deliver the income stream that we need in order just to have these goals to begin with? Because you can't really turn those goals or dreams into a reality if you can't back those goals and dreams with the actual financial capital that you're going to need. Now, I don't think Fink here is downplaying that at all. I think he's saying, yes, that's absolutely important. But a lot of people make the mistake of saying, okay, we've wrapped our arms around all of these assets and we've got the perfect financial plan in place, and we have absolutely no idea how to live in retirement. We have absolutely no idea what it is that we're actually going to be doing with our time. We don't know what a typical day is going to look like. And as he points to here, is this really just a long weekend? Is that how you should consider your retirement? Or is there a strong case to be made for layering in some structure to your day so that you have a more consistent schedule, something that you can actually live in on, say, like a typical Tuesday or Thursday, as opposed to having every single day feel like a Saturday? So they go on. He says, if you're pulling away from the workforce entirely, you may lose a sense of status and purpose that you got from your job. If retirement is all about leisure, ask yourself, are you good at leisure? That is an extremely interesting question and an extremely great point. I just had this experience recently where I'm teaching my son, he's 5, to ride a bike without training wheels. And on the first day, I'm having to hang on to the handlebars, hang on to the back of the seat, and he's just getting a sense of how the bike is actually going to balance because he's worked with a different bike. But that transition from training wheels to just 2 wheels is a big deal. But by the second day, I'm only having to have my hand on the back of his seat. And he's, we're running along. He's asking me, Dad, please don't let go. Don't let go. I don't think I can do this. Of course, I let go. And he has to experience falling and all of that. But by the third day, I only have to give him this tiny little push. And then he can ride his bike basically without my help. And it's dawning on me as I'm running next to my son down the trail behind our house as he's riding his bike on his own, he's not going to need me forever. And this period of time that I'm going to have with him as a boy is extremely short, tragically short. And then you come to discover, for a lot of people retiring in this day and age, that they fear irrelevance more than they fear death. And that would be certainly true of white-collar workers who have worked themselves up to perhaps a position of esteem or authority, and they've structured their day at work to be able to work on interesting projects that they enjoy and to work with only people that they enjoy. And now all of a sudden they're going to lose that esteem. They're not going to have the same status as they did when they were working as they walk into retirement. And a lot of these individuals discover, wow, I am terrible at this leisure deal. So the case that Fink is making here is saying, if you haven't even considered whether or not you've built up this leisure skill, you're probably not ready to retire. And for those of you who listened to the episode that we did with Mo, he gives his clients the same advice. He says, if you have not considered what you're going to actually be doing, if you've not operationalized your retirement as how you're going to be living on a day-to-day basis, do not retire. Mo says it's a paradigm shift, and that's being echoed here by Michael Fink. He goes on. He says, you see this so often. People will say, I don't understand how I'm supposed to fill my days. That lack of structure is a big problem because having to create your own structure is something that a lot of us aren't very good at. And that's very true. A lot of us have come to rely on the structure of the workday in order to essentially give us a roadmap of what it is that we're supposed to be doing day to day. And then we use our weekends as just time off. He goes on. The weekend or a vacation is a relief from life in the workplace. Okay? Relief from life in the workplace. It's doing something different. It's relaxing. But you're relaxing from something. And when you're relaxing all the time, this would be when you've entered retirement, when you have a complete lack of structure, what is it that's actually providing you joy? The listeners of this podcast know my wife and I, we have 7 children, 5 of whom are age 5 and under, all of whom are age 10 and under. And that might make it seem as though we don't have a lot of time for like a romantic life out of our obligations as parenting. And that might make it seem as though our dating life is lesser than people who might have more time. But our argument is actually precisely the opposite, which is when my wife and I have the opportunity to get childcare, which yes, is expensive, and go out on a date, we get to go out on a date away from something. So going out on a date for my wife and I represents a massive change to our typical routine that perhaps a person in the earlier stages of their life, or if they're earlier stage of their relationship, when they don't yet have children, when they go out on a date, it's not that different from what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. It's like they're not really escaping a lot of pressing obligations, not escaping looking for a stuffed white cat named Bella who is slowly ruining my life because she gets lost every night before bedtime. True story. They're not escaping that when they're going out on a date. So the same thing is what Fink is saying here is you can't consider your retirement like a long weekend, because your retirement is not really in its totality going to be an escape from your day-to-day business, your day-to-day work, your day-to-day life. It's going to become your day-to-day life. And so if you don't have that juxtaposition, or if you don't have that little bit of friction in your day-to-day life to provide you that escape, as he's saying here, is really going to start to lose its value. And you're going to start maybe to feel like you've just been cast adrift in this sea of leisure, and you're entirely directionless, and you don't really even know how to create a schedule in which you can enjoy what you're supposed to be enjoying. And that would be kind of the point of your retirement, would be to use the financial assets that you've accumulated at that point in time to really do the sort of things that you want to do. So he's saying it's really important that you create a structure that allows you to go from something to another thing and actually enjoy the things that you're doing. He goes on. Financial services companies are great at giving you images to help you imagine why you're saving so much money. One of my favorites is the couple who's sitting on a beach. Every financial services company feels as if they need to take a picture of an older couple sitting on a beach in chairs looking out over the ocean. And have you done that? I've done that. I've sat at the ocean and just looked, and I can last maybe an hour. Maybe I'll read a book, but by the time I get to the end of the week, I'm done. It's glorious to be on a beach where it's warm and to be doing something different than your regular grind. You appreciate the change in your routine, but when the leisure activity becomes the routine, is it really going to provide the same amount of satisfaction as it used to when it was the thing that you did while you were on vacation, or just the thing that you did while you on the weekends? And that's just more to the point. He's saying, yes, all of this leisure stuff is really great, but it does have an expiration date. It's a little bit like fish and house guests. After 3 days, it starts to get a little bit weird. And this actually brings a great quote from Oliver Burkeman, who wrote a book called 4,000 Weeks, and he's talking about the same thing. He's saying, Oliver says, we've been granted the mental capacity to make almost infinitely ambitious plans, yet practically no time at all to put them into action. This space that has been granted to us rushes by so speedily and so swiftly that all, save for a very few, find life at the end just when they're getting ready to live. And so what Oliver Burkeman is getting at there is, if you think about the range of experiences that you might conceive yourself having in retirement when you're pre-retired, they're infinite. But your actual ability to not only do them, but enjoy them is going to be tragically finite. And so they're both arguing for a more purposeful life by making sure you're allocating your time appropriately in retirement, and not just living this kind of knee-jerk life where you go about gathering up these experiences because your financial services company gave you a brochure with a happy-looking retired couple sitting in lawn chairs on a beach looking out over the ocean. They transition from that into the role of working longer. And in this section of the book, Michael says, one idea that is ingrained in us socially is that we just have to step away from the workforce at a certain age. That's what retirement means. In the future, I hope that we will increasingly see retirement as the ability to control one's own schedule. It doesn't necessarily mean that we stop working forever. And this, I think, he's saying one day. I really do think for a lot of white-collar workers, this is already becoming a reality, where many of the retirees that we work with, they step away from their formal employment arrangement, but they come back as an independent contractor who has a lot more flexibility over the kinds of projects that they choose to work on. And in our experience, those people tend to have some of the more fulfilling, particularly the early stages of retirement, because this is when they're working. And I think it's because they get to kind of bridge the gap in a little bit more of a seamless way, rather than stepping away from their work entirely and losing all of that social status and that, connection that they had to the people that they were working with. They can go back, but they can only do the things that they want to do. in this book, Fink tells a story of a retired engineer who's actually working at the American College for Financial Services. And he essentially says, I'm going to work on these projects, and if you ask me to do any more than I want to do, I'm just going to tell you, and in his words, buzz off. Because he'll say, buzz off, I'm going to go biking in Europe, and that's what I want to do. I don't have time for any more projects. And Fink thinks that that's a really great way for a person to transition from working full-time to being retired full-time, is to try to find a work arrangement that just allows them to work the projects they want to work. And I think that that's an extremely great point. So it goes through there. Okay. The sort of the last section of the chapter from Michael is the importance of maintaining your health and your relationships in retirement. And one of the things that I think people need to start considering, maybe as young as their 30s, 40s, and 50s, well before they actually retire, is you want to have an idea of the things that you're going to be capable of doing with your physical body in retirement, or the things that you're going to want to be able to do with your physical body in retirement. So the idea of going on a cruise or traveling internationally or walking through Europe or Italy or places like that, or Greece, seeing all the various sites that you're going to want to see. Maybe some people have had this habit of underestimating how effortful that might be from a just purely physical standpoint. And so the tie that I made here was to a book called Outlive, and that's written by a doctor who specializes in longevity by the name of Peter Attia. And his framework, or the framework through which he sees this issue, is he likes to imagine himself in what he calls his marginal decade. So that would be your last decade of life. If you're lucky, this might be the decade of your 80s. If you're really lucky, it might be the decade of your 90s, somewhere in there. But he doesn't think that it's enough just to live that long, okay? Because he likes to talk about lifespan, and lifespan is important, but in your retirement, your health span, and that's going to be some of the things that they're talking about here, that's going to be vastly more important than just the number of years that you live, particularly if you make it to the long end. Everybody would agree if you die in your 60s or even in your early 70s, that would be tragically premature, and it wouldn't really matter how robust your health was. If you died in some kind of accident, nobody would say, oh, yeah, it's fine because he was healthy right up until the end, if the end comes prematurely. But in the same vein, many of us, or many of the listeners, might have had a family member who was cognitively sharp into their 70s, but then the decline was rapid, and the last 5 or 10 years of their life were rather trying and tragic because it was such a departure from the person that they were that you can't really say they went on living for those last 5 to 10 years. They continued to draw breath, but they weren't really themselves. So Peter Attia gets his clients to imagine themselves in the marginal decade, and he wants them to list in as fine a detail as possible these sorts of things that they will want to be able to do by themselves, so without the help of other people. And this is well beyond just the six, the activities of daily living, the ADLs, where if you can't do those, you're considered disabled. He's like, no, we're going to go way above and beyond that, like being able to walk a mile under a certain amount of time, be able to carry groceries on your own, that kind of thing. So we can use that marginal decade framework and apply it directly to retirement. And I think the best way to be able to visualize that would be to consider, what are the kinds of things that you want to be able to do with your physical body in your 60s? What are the kinds of things you want to be able to do in your 70s and then 80s and beyond, let's say? And the thing people need to understand is what you're going to be able to do at that point in your life is largely going to be dictated by how well you've cared for your body well in advance of that. So what Fink here is saying is you need to start investing in your health way before you're actually retired. Because if you're having chronic health issues in your 70s, it's probably too late to start addressing those. You can definitely address the symptoms and you can improve the quality of your life. But if you want to have a really robust body in your 70s, you need to have a really, really robust body in your 50s. And one of the points that Fink is going to make in this book is we all like to live in this denial that we're going to experience physical and cognitive decline as we age. But it is an unavoidable reality, and one that we should not just stop denying, but that we should really embrace, not embrace as in it's inevitable, though it is, but embrace it because now there's actually something we can do in order to stave off physical and cognitive decline for as long as possible. So Michael says, let's say I want to go hiking when I retire. That's one of the things I want to have more time to do. If I don't maintain a good level of physical fitness as I approach retirement, I won't be able to hike a mountain. I need to invest time and resources in working out and keeping fit in order to support my retirement goals. If I don't make that investment, I can throw that goal out the window. I'm just not physically capable of achieving it. And that's exactly right. It's exactly what we just talked about with that marginal decade framework. He's envisioning a retirement where he's healthy enough to go hiking. So he needs to invest the time and energy right now in order to make sure that he can make that a reality. The next issue they talk about is not just investing in your health, but investing in relationships. And so Fink says, I had a professor at Texas Tech who had done some research on this, and he found that people who lived in their own homes were happier throughout their lives up until their late 70s. And this is important. But once they hit their 80s, people who lived in apartments are actually happier than people who live in their own home because they are less at risk of becoming socially isolated. And that makes a lot of sense. And I think that the lesson here is if you can age in place until you're in your mid to late 70s, that's probably going to confer some happiness on you and perhaps your loved ones because you're in a familiar place. You're probably near family. You have the autonomy and you feel like you have the freedom and you feel like you have the responsibility to take care of your own property. And again, you're probably just very comfortable there. But I think a discussion that it might be worth having with your spouse and your children well in advance of when this is just put upon you by some kind of a fall or an illness or just cognitive decline is how do I want to make that transition from living in our home that we've lived in maybe for many, many years to maybe living in not in a totally assisted living or nursing facility, but some of these newer communal living spaces for retirees who are not yet at that stage where they need ongoing in-home healthcare. And there's a lot more of these now. We had clients move into one actually not that long ago, and they're of the appropriate age. They're in their late 70s, and they have loved it. Their only thing that they regret is that they just didn't make that decision even a little bit sooner than they did. And you can imagine the psychological impact that this would have on a person. If you are the agent of change in your life, where you decide, hey, I'm ready to move out of the primary residence. We've done the research. This is the group of homes or the home that we want to move into. Here are some of our friends who are also moving in there. If you make that choice of your own volition when you're of sound mind and body, that's going to feel infinitely times better than if that decision is essentially made for you by your children or another loved one who's acting on your behalf because you've lost the ability to make decisions for yourself. So that's really something to consider, and that's why that's been borne out in the research. He goes on. The other thing we can think about is how do we create habits where we maintain these opportunities for social engagement? Does that mean going to the gym on a regular basis? You're probably doing that to maintain your health anyway, but also for social interaction, or volunteering, or working at an art museum. That sounds like a great opportunity to have a little bit of a challenge, especially if being in front of people is something that you enjoy. If it's something that you're good at, make the effort to establish that habit at the beginning of retirement. Otherwise, you could easily find yourself maybe 4 or 5 years in retirement thinking that that's something I ought to do. By that point, you may never actually get around to doing it. And again, that just speaks to making sure that you have an eye for the structure of your day and the kinds of things that you're going to be doing day to day, and then maybe piggyback a couple of these things that confer some happiness on you into one. So his point being, if you're going to the gym already just to maintain your health, the health of your physical body, why not invite a couple of retired friends to join you so that not only are you going to the gym to maintain your physical body and your health, but you're also using that as an opportunity to continue to deepen these social ties and strengthen the relationships that you have with some of the friends in your community who are at a similar age and stage in your life. Okay, so they go on, they talk about the importance of socialization, how maintaining relationships with friends and family is going to be extremely important. It's going to confer an advantage. And then another element of the socialization aspect of this is, Michael says, we become more vulnerable to scams when we get older. As our ability to recognize when people are taking advantage of us deteriorates, as our ability to recognize when people are taking advantage of us deteriorates by the time we get into our 80s and 90s. It's not like it was when we were in our 60s and 70s. We need to recognize that vulnerability is an important part of retirement and to anticipate that we will change as we get older. We will lose some of these capabilities that we had when we were younger. It's just natural. This tendency to think that we're going to be able to maintain the person that we were at the very beginning of retirement throughout retirement, but the data show that that does not happen. We do become more vulnerable, and to the extent that we can recognize that ahead of time, that's for the best. The shameless plug that I'm going to make here is a lot of people when they enter retirement are perfectly capable of managing their own affairs to a certain degree. You might need to work with a person in order to make the best selection for if you have a pension or if you're doing a 401k rollover or something that requires you make an irrevocable decision. But most financial advisors who are working with people who are, say, professionals in retirement, we are well aware that you guys have the cognitive abilities and sometimes even the interest to manage your own affairs. My point is that is a temporary setting, and you're going to get older, and you're going to become more vulnerable to scams. And perhaps your loved one or your spouse is not quite as interested in managing managing the finances or the household finances as you might be as the money person in the relationship. Those are all difficult realities to contend with. And so one of the points that we've made as a practice is hiring a financial advisor and using your skills or using your wisdom and your discernment that you've developed in your years in your career. That is extremely beneficial in the hiring process, because if you as the money person were to predecease your spouse, you can rest assured that she's going to be well taken care of by a team of individuals who's not going to try to take advantage of him or her. And so hiring a financial professional or a team of professionals, like maybe an estate planning attorney, an accountant, and a financial advisor, that's really an act of love to make sure that the loved ones that you leave behind when you walk out of this life, there's a team of individuals who can walk in and continue to provide the necessary ongoing care from a financial perspective that they're no longer going to get from you, who was the money person their whole life. And again, more and more of this is going to be the woman that has made the money in the household and she's the money person, and there's going to be plenty of couples where the men continue to earn the money, but more often than not, it's just one person. So it doesn't really matter who it is. That doesn't negate the fact that you might want to work with a professional, make sure that your loved one is well taken care of. The reality is that it's generally just one. And that skill, unfortunately, tends to die with the person who had it. So we think that it's a real act of selflessness and kindness to hire these professionals, especially when after you've passed, your spouse is probably older, grieving, vulnerable to people who are looking to make a quick buck off of the assets. And that's when we can see people get taken for a ride. And we would really prefer that not happen. So Fink raises the same point. We get older, we get more vulnerable. And he says, one of the ways we're failing in retirement is that we're not recognized that cognitive and physical decline are inevitable, and that they are going to mean that we are different people when we're in the later stages of retirement than we are in the earlier stages. Okay. That pretty much wraps up the main points that Fink had for Christine Benz. And because Christine is wonderful, and the way that she wrote this book, kind of as I alluded to at the beginning, is 20 vignettes talking about retirement. We probably won't cover all of them here, but she does something glorious for the reader, which she summarizes the chapter with her key takeaways at the end. Now, I won't go through them here because I don't think it's necessary, but just know she's going to provide these key takeaways for you. And again, because this is just a wonderfully written book, she's going to provide some related resources where you can take a look at some of the primary research that was done by Michael Fink or some of his other writings. So as an example, he's got an article that he wrote, Here's What Makes Retirees Happy. That's from Morningstar. Or Examining Financial Fraud Against Older Adults. Or Having Your Retirement Cake and Slicing It Too. These are resources that I would certainly want to explore if these topics appealed to you. And the other nice thing about this book is these 20 chapters, you don't have to read through them in lockstep. You can jump around, find the things that you're interested in or that pique your interest, read those chapters, look at the related resources, and then just come back later. So that was the first lesson. And again, that lesson was by Michael Fink. It was titled Visualize Your In-Retirement Lifestyle. And I think that the central thesis of that is operationalize what your day-to-day living is going to look like in retirement well ahead of when you get there.
This broadcast contains the current opinions of the hosts and are subject to change. The broadcast is provided for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice or recommendations. Investors should obtain professional advice before making investment decisions. This is not a complete analysis of every material fact regarding any company, industry, or security. The information has been obtained from sources we consider to be reliable but cannot guarantee their accuracy. For more information about any companies discussed, please contact Baird. Past performance is not indicative of future results, and diversification does not ensure a profit or protect against loss. All investments carry some level of risk, including loss of principal. An investment cannot be made directly in an index. This broadcast may not be reproduced without express permission of Robert W. Baird & Co., Incorporated.